Madam Clerk, are you ready? It is 5 o'clock, and I officially call the Richland County Development and Services Committee meeting to order. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Brenham,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yeah, here.
Here.
Barron,
Here.
English,
Present.
Newton.
Here.
We have a quorum.
Thank you. I'd also like to recognize my colleagues Aline, Weaver, and Teresio. You're on this committee this time, so yes, so you've already been recognized. Thank you. That brings us to item number 2, the election of chair. The floor is open.
Madam Chair.
I nominate Shakise Newton for chair.
Second.
There's a motion and a second. Are there any additional nominations? Hearing none, the nomination period is closed. Madam Clerk, please call for the vote.
Brenham,
Here. Just kidding. Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. And thank you for your support. That brings us to item number 3, the approval of the minutes on pages 6 through 8.
Moved.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. Madam Clerk?
Brenham,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Item 4 is the adoption of the agenda. I will look to our staff to see if there are any changes.
There've been no requested changes.
Move to approve, adopt the agenda.
Second.
Madam Clerk?
Brenham,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. That brings us to item number 5, items for discussion and action. And I'll note that Assistant County Administrator Jensen put information in our seats with a presentation on impact fees for your awareness. That motion is to direct the administrator to research and present to council current laws and benefits of enacting impact fees in Richland County. The purpose is to help reduce the tax burden on residents by not having to pay the complete cost of development in Richland County. Is there a staff member that would like to address this item?
Yes, ma'am, Madam Chair. If you would recognize Assistant County Administrator Eric Jensen.
Mr. Jensen, you are recognized for the record.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Now I can't do my normal spiel, so now you've got me
You
throwing
can,
me
we
off.
love it. We love it.
Okay. ACA Eric Jensen for the record. You know, I learned that many, many years ago when I was testifying up at the state legislature, and I did not know the routine. And but I learned after that when I was very embarrassed. So thank you for humoring me. I appreciate that. But what we have before you today is a presentation that I'm going to give, and if you would, Madam Clerk, cue it up. Thank you. There are many slides in here. I'm not going to go over all of them because really what I'm hoping is that as a committee, you will discuss the merits, and you can go back and look at all the different information in this presentation at another time. But the high points of it that I want to talk about, first of all, let me recognize that Mr. Carson Buys, our consultant, is online. So if you have questions today, he is available via Zoom to respond to your questions. He just had an obligation in another part of the state today. But really, if you look at the first slide there, the key points that I want you to all remember is that impact fees can only be used prospectively. In other words, going forward, they're for new development. They're not for correcting things that are in the past. And that's really important to remember when we're doing this. Next slide. Also wanted you to think about the things that you may want, reasons why you might want to have an impact fee. What is the county doing? What is going on in here that an impact fee might benefit? And it's pretty expensive to instigate an impact fee. It's not something we can just do on the fly. We can't do it internally as staff. I mean, I could try, but the product would not be satisfactory. You really need somebody who does this for a living, who can research and parse the data and give you good information. Next slide. Impact fees are very much specific to a jurisdiction. You can't just copy somebody else's ordinance. Sometimes we do that when we're looking at things. We go to look at best practices. And yes, you can look at best practices, and I have a few in my presentation, but every single jurisdiction is unique. Next slide, please. So when you're preparing an impact fee, you start with an analysis of the service level, what the current on-the-ground conditions are. Then you kind of do an analysis of what you expect to have happen in the future in terms of infrastructure costs. And then you break that down and you say how much of it is attributable to existing development, how much is attributable to new development. Next slide. Again, here's a couple highlights from the study that was already done that you have seen before that's also in your packet today by our consultant. Basically, he identified 7 different categories, which are effectively sheriff, transportation, EMS, fire, solid waste, water, and sewer. He also identified a 7th one, stormwater, but he said that the county at this time does not have a sufficiently detailed master plan that he could prepare a study, an impact fee based on it. In other words, there's just not enough information out there at this point. Next slide. This part here, these case studies and considerations, this is like homework just for you to go back and think about at a future time. So we're going to kind of skip over that, other than I'm going to mention that as staff, we looked at 11 different jurisdictions that have impact fees here in South Carolina. And Madam Clerk, if you would skip forward to the graphs. Okay, here we go. So here, what we found out is that dependent on the first of all, we found out that the impact fee structures varied widely here in the state. Some of them were very heavily skewed towards school districts and parks and recreation, and some of them were skewed toward what I would call the nuts and bolts things that counties do. And so, again, that's all this information is. I just wanted to show you how widely, what the breadth is of programs that are out there. Next slide, please. On this slide here, again, this talks a little bit about the categories that were specifically mentioned in our feasibility study. So I just took those 6 that our consultant recommended that we look at, and I said, okay, those same jurisdictions that we looked at before, if we were to somehow, again, I'm not recommending we do it, I'm just saying, if we were to adopt their fee schedule, how much revenue would be generated in Richland County in 1 year? And that's what these numbers are. Next slide, please. So again, things that I want you to take home with, and I hope that when you'll think about when you're discussing it today, one, again, there's no ordinance out there that we can copy. There's no structure, there's nothing that Richland County is unique. Again, impact fees can only be used for infrastructure, and they can only be used to offset infrastructure related to new development. They can't remedy existing deficiencies in your infrastructure. Next slide. Again, this is the same thing, again, what I was just saying. When you're having your discussion today, part of your discussion obviously should be, is it worth our time to pursue, to take the next step? The next step, just for your information, is gonna cost probably in the $100,000 to $150,000 range. That's what a full impact fee study and ordinance preparation analysis would cost. That's what we assume. That's based on what I've seen in the market recently. So understand that taking the next step is not an inexpensive proposition. Next slide. This is, again, some more homework. This is just case studies. These are just some things I threw out to, again, to help make you think and to get you kind of to formulate in your mind what you want to do with your policy. So if you would slide to the second to the last, skip to the second to the last, my wrap-up slide. Okay, here we go. Sorry, went back. There we go. So the things that you can be thinking about, talking about, what services does the county provide? What services are impacted by new growth? How does the county currently fund service infrastructure? And what effects would an impact fee program have on residential development and economic development? Because really those are the 2 big things where, an impact fee adds cost to development. The other side of it is that cost is already technically being paid by the county. It's just being paid through a different source of revenue. And so the argument for impact fees is that the person using the service, the new homeowner, the new tenant, is effectively paying for it, whereas in the past, those fees were being paid for by the populace in general. Because one way or the other, this infrastructure has to be built, or the development can't occur. So those are just things to keep in mind. So with that, I just wanted to turn it back over, Madam Chair.
Thank you. And we'll note that the full report prepared by our consultant is in the DNS packet for your review there. And now I'll open the floor for questions, starting with Councilwoman English.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Jensen, you were talking about or new development. And could this be used for the current development of the 911 center, or it'll be old by the time this is in effect?
Thank you, Madam Chair, if I may. Yes, good question. So, yes, it can be, impact fees can pay for infrastructure retroactive if, but, and again, this is for my consultant to kind of flesh out more, but let's just say, for example, there's a large public infrastructure project and it's in part of your approved impact fee program, and you budget it and you allocate it out, then yes, you can recoup those costs, what they call excess capacity, as new development comes on. So for example, if you were to build a 911 center and that was part of your approved impact fee program, there was an impact fee associated with it. As new homes come on, they could pay their share of that 911 center or whatever the infrastructure was. The most common are water and sewer. So for example, they'll go out and the county will build a 5 million gallon sewer project. They don't need 5 million gallons right now, but they know that in the next 10 years, X amount of development's gonna come along. And so then they can say, okay, we're bonding for it, it's this much money, each unit of sewer costs this much, so every home that comes on will contribute back toward that infrastructure. But you can't use it retroactively for a development that's already built.
Jensen, if you'll stay there for a moment.
Yes, ma'am.
Are there other questions from the body? Ms. Teresa and then Ms. Barron?
Thank you. And so if I'm understanding this correctly, the county, if we were to charge a fee, let's just say that the sewer infrastructure for one home cost $100 or something, we can only really, we would only really charge what that actual number is. We wouldn't, for instance, charge $120 to create new capacity or something like that. Am I understanding that correct, Lee?
Yes, and let me, if I may,
Yes, please.
thank you. So you have to put in your plan, in your impact fee plan, a specific project or cost or an allocation. In other words, it has to say that we anticipate it's going to be this infrastructure is going to cost this much, and we're going to allocate this amount of it. So it specifically has to recoup the actual impact of that development. So if the actual impact is $125 worth of infrastructure, then yes. If the actual cost is $100, you can't add $25 on top of it.
Thank you. Just wanted to make that clear.
Councilwoman Barron?
Thank you. So I got a couple of questions, one of which will probably be more scenario driven. So I want to, my first question is, with impact fees, these fees are being paid by the residents who are coming into this new development, or is it,
Yeah.
is it being paid by the residents and the developer who is bringing in this new development?
Great question. So
You're recognized in
Thank you.
perpetuity.
thank you, ma'am. So the answer is it just depends on how the developer and the county structure it. So there are places where it's the impact fee is recouped through property taxes. It's commonly called Mello-Roos structure in California. That's just the name of the practice there. And there are ones where the developer pays for it when they get a building permit or when they do whatever. It just depends on what the jurisdiction wants and how they want to set it up.
So as one of the people on this motion, I think one of the things we're thinking about as I look at my district specifically, lots of growth being, that's taking place there. And just the conversation I had today was about you know, roads being widened, sewer, water, all the things, right? And you have the new homeowners who are coming on and they're excited about their new home and their new subdivision. However, you have existing homeowners who are not as excited, but yet they now will be paying into this impact fee. And so I just want to go on the record for my colleagues to say that I don't think that that's necessarily what I had in mind. But I did have in mind that as these developers come in, whether they're building homes or grocery stores, that as a means to come into our neighborhoods and our communities, that would be their personal buy-in to help us alleviate some of the growing pains that we're having. And so I know that we'll have more conversations. This is the first part of the conversation that we're having, but I guess there's room for that type of structure as well.
If I may, so existing homeowners would never pay into an impact fee.
Right.
But what happens effectively is if you don't have an impact fee, then the people who are existing residents, existing property owners, effectively pay for part of the infrastructure cost because the infrastructure is paid for through anything from property taxes to sales tax to whatever mechanism the county has for collecting and paying for that infrastructure. And so effectively what happens is that it shifts the burden of who pays for the infrastructure effectively wholly away from a general populace base to a specific base of users, of people who are, you know, generating the need for the infrastructure.
Thank you. And one other thing, if maybe one, because I got to get to my scenario too that I want you to kind of run for me. So when we identify infrastructure as it relates to impact fees, we're talking about roads, we're talking about police departments, fire departments. I heard you say water, sewer. What else can be included in that infrastructure?
So typically, anything that is what we would call a capital project that is not in South Carolina, if I remember right, it's $100,000, I think is the limit. It has to be at least valued at $100,000. So a piece of fire equipment that is valued at over $100,000 could be considered infrastructure for impact fees. But never services. It has to be literally pipe in the ground, asphalt on the ground, a piece of capital equipment. It has to be something that meets the definition of infrastructure under the state code. And I don't know off the top of my head what all those items are, but typically they're the things that you said. Water treatment plants, stormwater pipe, sewer pipe, all of those things are absolutely, a fire station could be a capital project, a police substation. Those things are typically the things that you see paid for by impact fees.
So here's my scenario. Well, you know what? I think you already answered my scenario, so
Okay.
I'm done, Ms. Newton. Thank you, Mr. Jensen.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. Are there other questions from the body or from other council members? You're recognized, Councilman Weaver.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Jensen, two questions. One, could the infrastructure costs be used to pay for bonds? Say to build a firehouse, can they pay for bonds?
Yes, sir. So anything that qualifies in your ordinance and under the state code as infrastructure that you set up, the project can be bonded for. You can build it in advance, and then you can pay back the excess capacity through your fees. Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, my second question, can the money be combined with other monies? Let's say the fire station costs, $15 million, and the cost related to development raises $3 million. Can another 12 come from fire service? Can it be mixed with other monies?
Yes, sir. In fact, that is the norm.
That's the norm,
Yeah,
okay.
the norm is the impact fees will usually pay a portion of any new infrastructure because I've never seen a situation where the infrastructure didn't benefit the balance of the community in some respect. And so it's almost always a combination of funds.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? You're recognized, Councilman Branham.
Thank you. So at a previous committee meeting, the consultant spoke to us primarily about, revenue generation on the new residential rooftops, and we discussed, it was proposed that maybe more of the revenue would be generated from the non-residential development impact fees. And we talked about, trying to run some numbers maybe based off of, maybe it was land disturbance or something, see if we could come up with what that might, generate for us. Do you have anything along those lines?
Yes, sir. The tables in the PowerPoint that I gave are actually based on our 2023 permit data. And so I effectively took the impact fee schedules from 11 different jurisdictions, and I applied them to our 2023 actual permits. And so these are just simple graphic ones, but the spreadsheets are pages and pages and pages long. And so I have them. And if anybody wants the actual Excel hard data where I crunch every single category, you are welcome to it. And Mr. Branham, I think you do, so I just plan on receiving an email from me.
I'll take it. Thanks.
Okay.
If I could, Mr. Jensen, because
ma'am.
I don't know that I interpreted this graph the way that you just presented it. So could you explain again what this graph represents?
Yes, ma'am. So we researched the impact fee ordinances and schedules, adopted schedules from 11 different South Carolina jurisdictions, and they're the ones listed on the left-hand side there.
Right?
And then we took the 2023 permit fee calculations. We actually went through, looked at every single permit. We grouped them as well as we could because, again, every impact fee ordinance is different, so nobody groups things exactly the same. So we did our best to group and to extrapolate, and then we literally just applied their rates to our permit fees, or to our permits. And so that's how we came up with these numbers.
So looking at the first bar, for example, this is if Richland County had Georgetown County's rates, this is the amount of revenue that Richland County would receive based on our permitting data.
Exactly, yes, ma'am.
Okay, just making sure that is not how I interpreted this
Oh,
chart
sorry.
the first time.
Okay.
No problem. And so I appreciate you explaining that. And I have a few questions for you as well. I think, Ms. Teresa, do you have additional questions?
Yes, my question really was just around, we've taken these, I think you said 11 locations. Presumably this is, I guess my question is around how widespread are these fees? Like, is it more common amongst our 46 counties and however many municipalities to have these fees, or, and I'm looking again down the list and seeing that these are bodies that have experienced a lot of growth, and we are expecting to experience another level of growth. So just wanted to ask how you kind of came to pick these to look at.
Thank you. So I looked at the data from our consultant who had identified some of the jurisdictions. Then I just simply went to Google and I just searched for South Carolina impact fees, and I found all the jurisdictions that I could. I do not think there are very many more than this, and I think I hit most of them. I would say there's not as many as half again. As well, there could be, and I just didn't find them. But the other thing that I noticed is something that you just mentioned, is that it seems that it is the jurisdictions that are experiencing growth or that anticipate experiencing growth who have taken the time and the effort to create impact fee programs. And those, I don't want to say sleepy counties, but the counties that are not experiencing growth do not seem to have undertaken this effort.
Are you finished, Ms. Teresa? Yes. I guess to that point, Mr. Jensen, to me, it seems like there's also another category of jurisdiction, which might be the jurisdiction that has so much leverage that they don't need impact fees. So for example, my impression, and this may be old data, but is that there are places like Berkeley County, for example, that say, if you want to come here, these are the improvements that you will make. You don't want to make those? Don't come. And so they don't have an official impact fee per se, but they have structures where they're fast growing, where there are people that want to be there, where there are concessions that they're able to get. And I don't know how much that would be represented, but I've seen that happen as well. But I do have a few questions. So one of the hopes that I had for impact fees seems like it would not work. And so I want to confirm this impression. I am aware of municipalities and jurisdictions that will say things like, if the level of service on our road is a B, and you want to bring your development here, then the level of service for that road must remain a B, whatever you have to do to fix it. Based on what I'm hearing, and this is where I want you to correct me, it doesn't sound like the impact fees work exactly that way. Can you use that example that I gave? So we're talking about a specific geographic area. We're talking about a specific road. Let's call it Acme Road. And there's going to be a new development. It's going to bring approximately this many cars, this many trips. This is what's going to happen to the level of service. What would impact fees allow us to do to redress that specific situation?
So, good question. And the general idea of impact fees is to do exactly that. It's to establish a baseline service level and to keep it at that level, and for new development to pay a sufficient to maintain that level of service. That's generally that's the idea behind impact fees. It's never that clean. I'm going to give you a real world example. Many of you know I came from the city of Reno, and there we had a regional road impact fee for the entire region, not just the city and the county. And basically, as new development came in and impact fees were collected, established regional improvements went in. And so a new intersection, a new set of lights might be built, for example. It may be a mile away from the development, but it would release traffic, or it would improve traffic in the area in general to benefit that development. Because sometimes you have a development that comes in and it may be in the middle of an existing development with roads all around it, and so it just connects to it. But it generates traffic and it generates impacts. And really, you don't feel them right there in the development itself. It's a mile away where the major road that the development feeds into and where the traffic impacts are being felt. And so that's kind of what happens with impact fees typically is, the money is pooled to address larger infrastructure issues that impact that development may cause, but it may not be physically located exactly on the development. So that is more typical.
Thank you. And my next question is actually related to geography. And so, as I tell my kids sometimes, listen to what I mean and not what I say. I'm going to try to ask this question well.
Yeah.
So, you have a potential example like the one that I just shared. We are in this neighborhood. We travel on this road. This road is going to be impacted. Therefore, there's an impact fee where we are paying our part of the costs that we are creating for infrastructure. So I am geographically near the area where the improvement is. My question is, it sounds like there's also broader infrastructure that's not maybe geographically proximate. So an emergency services center may or may not be near my house. I may not be able to see it from the window, but because I am a resident, there's a certain cost per resident, and so growing increases the cost of that infrastructure that is far away. My question is, I just want to make sure I understand, do the impact fees do cover both of those scenarios, that both locally in my neighborhood near me, they can fix issues and also address those broader issues that are outside of my neighborhood but are part of the county? I don't know if I was clear.
No, very clear. So I'm gonna give you another scenario. So subdivision A is being built and it's adjacent to a collector road or an arterial road. And it's a large subdivision. It's going to put a significant amount of traffic onto that road. the developer may be required by the state board or by the county or whoever owns the road to install a traffic deceleration lane or a semaphore or to widen the road in that area. And then the developer may not pay impact fees, or a portion of the impact fees will be reduced because the developer will install direct infrastructure right in the area because that is what the appropriate agency determines the infrastructure is needed. Or it may literally be 1 block away and whatever agency is responsible for that infrastructure says, this subdivision coming in at this time triggers the need to widen this road here. And then they will take those impact fees, even though the subdivision is a block away and doesn't actually touch the road, they may say that subdivision or that improvement or that commercial building or that economic development, that very large economic development triggers the need to now widen the road here. So the answer is yes, it can be immediately adjacent, it can be nearby, and it can be far away. And it can be all three at the same time sometimes.
Thank you. And so then, did you have a question, Councilwoman Barron? You're recognized.
So as we continue to talk, the wheels are going. So when we think about the impact fees, and let's say we've got a subdivision coming, right? So we would have our impact fee structure already in place, and then when this new subdivision is being proposed to be built, like we'll do the zoning hearing tonight.
Yes, ma'am.
And as a part of their phase of their application, then we would know that, okay, the Barron subdivision is coming in, and now we can assess them ... based upon what we know that they're proposing to build. Is that how that would work when we think of anticipating new projects? Or is it something that we know, or we anticipate, like we have Scout Motors coming, and we anticipate that traffic is going to be coming up and down Wilson Boulevard. So because of that, now we say anything that is being proposed to be built or anything on Wilson Boulevard, Richland County has already identified that this is an area that will have these impact fees. Is it one and the same, or is it a combination? Tell me a little bit, because for me, what I'm hoping to get is literally how you started, and that is talking about how we can plan for the growth that is coming to our county and financially assess those entities that are attributing to our positive growth, right? I'm going to choose to think that it's going to be positive growth, instead of noting that how it is now, our constituents will say, this subdivision is built and now we need to widen these roads, and now we come back, whether it's with the penny tax funds or with other funds, trying to widen roads and resurface roads, when in essence, my hopes and my thoughts is that if we have this impact fee structure in place, we can, anticipate that, the traffic on the roads, or, more customers down in Lower Richland, that maybe we can provide water, sewer to, those kind of things. So can you talk to us a little bit about that?
Yes, ma'am. So an impact fee has to be set in advance, and it has to be fair and equitable across the board. So, typically, unless there are some instances like school districts, for example, school district A may have one impact fee and school district B may have one impact fee. But more often within a jurisdiction, the fees are uniform. So if you build a single family home and the rate is based on square feet, you're going to pay X cents per square foot as part of your impact fee for each different category that you have selected. And again, you don't have to have all 6 that the consultants recommended. Most jurisdictions did not. Most jurisdictions that we surveyed had 1, 2, or 3. Some had a few more. And then to get into your question, so what you would do, depending again on the infrastructure, you will commonly see sewer infrastructure will get built in advance. They will say, we anticipate 1,000 new homes coming on in the next 10 years. And they'll actually start building their sewer treatment plant in advance. And then as the plant gets built, they'll say, okay, we're building 10 million gallons. Right now we have a 5 million gallon need. So we have 5 million gallons of freeboard or of excess capacity. And then we anticipate that over the next 10, 20, however many years, that capacity will be taken up by new development. Roads are a little trickier. Sometimes, yes, they will actually go out and build the roads in advance and widen them, especially if it's very fast growing, if the area it has a lot of growth and they know where things are coming, then yes, they'll sometimes go out and start widening the roads in advance. But where you see it the most is water and sewer. That's where you really see infrastructure being built in advance, because if the home comes online and there's no sewer and there's no water, you can't just kind of get by with a skinny road. You know, you're in trouble. And so usually that's where you see most of the infrastructure being built in. And then roads are usually more reactive, which is, you know, what we see here in South Carolina. But it's those other items that are typically where they're much more cautious and they're more progressive in getting them built in advance.
So if I could interject for a moment, Ms. Barron, because this is our one item for action. There are a few other items for discussion. I want to be mindful of our time. So first, to clarify the actions that are before us, we are at a point where if we wanted to proceed with impact fees, we would need to hire a consultant to help us prepare those recommendations, et cetera. And so a question is before us, is that something that we want to pursue? And additionally, if it is something that we want to pursue, is that something that we would want to try to budget for in this year, where quite frankly, it has not been budgeted and would probably be frowned upon by administration? Or is that something, he doesn't frown, he just gives side eye. No. Or is that something where we would want to look at asking for it to be in next year's budget? Additionally, given where we are now, the other option is this something that we want to keep in committee for additional discussion? I know I find myself having more questions that I don't know that I personally feel, while I support this, the whole idea behind impact fees is that we're able to be more proactive and that we're creating situations where everyone is paying their fair share for infrastructure, which is what we want. I don't know is this fully baked enough to send to council or not? And so I present, one choice is if we want to move it forward, those are the decisions to make. That we say, yes, we want to do it, no, we don't, and how we want to pay for it. Alternately, we can keep it in committee for additional discussion. So I look to the body and our other council members who are here to see what you would like to do with this item.
Madam Chair,
You're recognized, Ms. Barron.
I'd like to make a motion to keep this in committee.
Second.
It's been moved and properly seconded. As a quick item of discussion, do we need a motion to keep this in committee, or does it just stay if we don't forward it?
It stays if you don't forward it, but if you want to get, I guess, the mind of the people here, you can have a vote, but you don't have to.
Gotcha. Well, we have a motion and a second. Madam Clerk, will you call the roll, please?
Branham,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes?
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.
Thank you. So that item will remain in committee. You're recognized, Councilwoman Barron.
And just so that we're clear, I don't want it to just stay in committee on the list of, for it to remain dormant. I hope that this will be a continued conversation, and even as we address questions offline, to bring that as an update back to the body so that we can continue movement on this item.
Agreed. Thank you. And to that point, Madam Clerk, if you would just send an email to our council members reminding them that the full consultant report is in the DNS packet and asking that if there's any feedback that they'd like to submit, that they submit it. And I'll let you insert the appropriate time before agendas are prepared so we have it for our next meeting. Councilwoman Teratio, did you want to say something before we move to our next?
I think I
Multiple
just wanted
items.
to speak to the timing of this because we are at the end of February, so we would have March, April, perhaps May, before we were, to enter into the next fiscal year. So just thinking through timing on what staff would need this committee to do to move it forward to council and then prepare to include it in FY '26 budget. How many, I just wanted to kind of check in with staff to see about timing.
So in terms of process, well, let me ask you a question. In terms of timing, ideally, any mechanisms that would allow this item to be included in the budget would be appropriate for that timing. And I don't want to throw everything off, but just say, for example, the committee did not get to the point to where it had decided to move this to council that way. You also have the ability during that process, the individual member could make a budget motion request to fund for the purpose of this study and still have full council address it that way. So I just wanted you to know, I know that's not the process you're asking about, but timing wise, I wanted you to know there are a couple of different mechanisms, but ideally around that May time, we would need some sort of action from a member of council or from the council's committee to make a decision about funding for a project like this. Is that fair?
Thank you. Yes.
Okay.
That brings us to item 6, items for information. Item 6A, I move to direct the administrator to draft a moratorium ordinance and bring it back to council. To be more specific, that was for the Olympia neighborhood as documented in previous agenda packets, and also it would be in the minutes for the last council meeting. There is an update on page 40. Is there anything else that staff would like to share? Ms. Williams, it looks like you have been voluntold by ACA Jensen. I don't know if you saw him point to you. And it looks like you can probably stay there. Not on.
There it is. Okay, sorry. Good afternoon, Sunithia Williams, Director of Community Planning and Development. So we're working on drafting the requirements for the Olympia Overlay District, and at the same time, we're working on wording for a moratorium ordinance to slow down any development in the Olympia area while we're working on the overlay district. So we have drafted an ordinance. We forwarded to the county attorney's office, which is for review, and I believe that will be coming in front of the body for review next month. As far as the architectural overlay, we've had several public meetings in the Olympia area. We've gotten feedback. Most of the feedback we've received is related to internal processes, procedures, how we actually implement it internally, not so much any negative feedback regarding the actual architectural standards that we're proposing in the overlay district. So our goal is to try to have that in front of the Planning Commission next month for their review and consideration, and to see if they're willing to make the recommendation to move it forward to full council for review. So that process is also moving forward.
Thank you.
Can I
Quickly, you may.
thank you. Just want to say thank you to staff for working on this. This is something that the community has been asking for since literally I probably was elected to this seat. So I really, really appreciate you all working on this.
Thank you.
Ditto.
That brings us to our items pending analysis where no action is required. Item 7A, I move that the county council direct the county administrator to research and provide to council ways to secure title to subdivision roads that were developed but never had ownership transferred to the county, and to recommend changes to county ordinances and/or protocols to better assure that future development of subdivision roads includes conveyance of title to the county unless there is an understanding between the developer and the county that the subdivision roads will intentionally remain privately owned and maintained, which is a very long way of saying we are trying to take care of your roads, y'all. Is there an update on this item?
The update that's in your packet on page 41, those last bullet points still represent where things lie with the Department of Public Works, identifying those areas, and then working with the legal team to determine you know, what those parcels are that remain not in the county's possession, and then whether or not there are any, how can I say this, unclear points of ownership when it comes to some of these parcels, because a lot of times that's what we find out. There's a number of different hands that are a part of that process. So, and then as we identified at the bottom, once that's all cleared up, then we'll come back to this committee and ultimately talk about what that process looks like. So that process is not completed, but those are the steps that are being undertaken. And as you deal with some of the other property matters that we've come before you with, you've had an example of what happens when you have multiple owners of parcels and different questions of ownership and how that impacts our ability to do work on roads that are privately owned roads that are not in the council's or in the county's road process. So once we get that done, we'll come back, but there is certainly not a specific and clean task to do.
You're recognized, Councilwoman Barron?
Said I'll be quick.
Okay.
We're on the clock. But I just want to say to staff, first of all, thank you for your continued work on this. I would just like to note, you know, this came in July, and I really hope that we can start to move forward to, you know, resolve. I know it's a lengthy list. I will say I live in a subdivision where the roads are in question, and they are poor. There are some people in this room that live in subdivisions that the roads are poor, and they're not owned by the county. And it's a part of what you just described, Mr. Brown. And so this is becoming an ongoing thing. And as we continue to experience growth in our county, I think that having this structure in place is going to help us as we move forward. So I look forward to a speedy resolve. No pressure. Wink, wink.
No. So, Madam Chair, very, like 3 seconds.
Yes.
0.5. So just quickly with that, the challenge simply becomes when there is roads that the county takes in that is not the county standard, because the county has a standard that it says that it applies. And so that's where this process comes in, that is how do you differentiate from the current standard? So thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you. You're recognized, Councilman Branham.
Madam Chair, did the county attorney have something he wanted to add to piggyback on that? If the chair wouldn't mind recognizing him.
Recognized.
Yes, I just want to say that, you know, and that's part of a couple of things he mentioned. A part of the issues is that one, ownership, because there are some roads that are like in litigation, and we don't want to take on a road that's in litigation and basically take on liability, and which is the same issue with if the road's not up to county standards, then we become responsible if anything happens on that road, and we become liable. So working out those issues are things that, you know, we have to do as well.
Recognized, Councilman Branham.
So you guys staff met 4 months ago. What, do you have an ETA or like a cutoff where you're gonna say, hey, this will be the first batch of roads we're gonna address? Mr. Administrator or Mr. Attorney, either one of you?
So, no, so we have Director Williams who's going to kind of provide you a quick update on that.
Yes, so the Public Works Department is going to first focus on the initial set of roads that the county originally agreed to look at. So they have that internal list. The challenge are the roads that weren't originally agreed that they would look at, and identifying any additional roads that are not owned by the county and are not covered by some other private form of maintenance. So they are going to try to focus on the list that they currently have to see where they are in that process, because they've been working through that list and they don't know the status at the time that the briefing was put together. They didn't know the status of where they were with that list. So that's what they're trying to complete first. And they should have that to us hopefully by the end of March.
Okay, by the end of March, we'll have a list.
From that first list.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Branham. That brings us to our next item, where the question will also be one of timeline. I move to direct the county administrator to commission an analysis of the county's residential development permitting processes and standards related to noise, flooding, air pollution, and other environmental impacts in order to ensure that the county is adopted and is following the most current industry best practices to reduce negative environmental impacts. This may include recommendations for improving and enhancing the county's land development code, land development design manual, comprehensive plan, zoning map, and related documents. And there is an update in our agenda packet on page 42 and 43, which I don't see where they reference timeline, so that would be my question about when we can expect to hear back.
So I can speak to that. If you look at the bottom of page 43, while there was not a specific timeline, the recommendation was to include this as a part of the update of the comprehensive plan.
I see that.
So that would be the general timeline associated with that.
Okay. I'll come back with questions about that later. Are there any other quick questions from the body? Then that brings us to our final motion. I move that the county consider developing a neighborhood master plan that establishes policies and goals related to the preservation and development in the Ballantyne community, with the goal to preserve and promote the desired character of the community while also conserving and protecting the waters and watershed of Lake Murray. And that is in your agenda packet, starting at page 44. And I know we had hoped to have a fulsome discussion of that, but we will have to wrap shortly to make room for the Administration and Finance Committee. But first, is there anything that staff wants to say to address this motion?
Let me see if did you want to address that? Oh, he wants to punt again to Director Williams.
You're recognized, Mr. Brown.
So I believe Director Williams was going to address this, but I believe there was another conversation. You can come to the podium. Related to master plan that we talked about having in general, but I'll let Director Williams address this specific motion.
You're recognized.
Yes, so I went back and I looked at the county's current neighborhood improvement program and the criteria that we currently have to establish new neighborhood master plans. I'll go into more detail, I know next month when you want a more in-depth conversation regarding the neighborhood program. But it was originally created back in 2005. At that time, it was done through budget ordinances. The council agreed to create a neighborhood planner position, and they later agreed to put funding towards creating these neighborhood master plans. And at that time, council also identified 10 areas where they wanted the original master plans to happen. So that's kind of the origin story of the neighborhood master plan program. Then later in 2016, internal criteria were developed for the need for future master plans, and that criteria looked at the scale. So the master plans had to be limited to an area that fits within a quarter-mile radius from an identified central point. It had to have substructure, meaning an established network that will be responsible for aiding with the implementation of the plan, i.e. a homeowners association or neighborhood association. And then you had to do a cost-benefit analysis to ensure as many citizens as possible have access to the resources offered by the neighborhood improvement program. When we took those criteria and looked specifically at the Ballantyne area, it was a very small scale. There's a map that we put together that just shows what a quarter-mile radius would be from what's known as the center of the Ballantyne area. And staff does not believe that meets the intent of what was requested through this neighborhood master plan. It would not fully cover the concerns regarding commercial development. It would not fully cover, it doesn't touch Lake Murray at all, so it would not cover any concerns regarding growth around Lake Murray. It doesn't even really touch subdivisions. So going off of the 26 criteria, we do not feel that our current criteria would achieve what was anticipated or what residents would like to see in that area.
And if I could interrupt you for two reasons. One is for the sake of time, because we're going to have to wrap this meeting, but also just to, and I'll let Councilman Branham add anything that he wants to say, that as it relates to this, you know, as happens many times, this was a motion that was made to achieve a specific objective in the community. And my understanding is that many conversations have taken place. If this isn't the vehicle, there's another vehicle, but that the county is going to continue to work to achieve the goals of this community. And so I would hate to leave the impression that that wasn't something that was going to continue to be pursued. Before we adjourn our meeting, Councilman Branham, is there anything that you want to add to address this motion?
Oh, thanks. That was a great summation, and just to confirm what you stated, we've had great conversations with staff. We're very clear on what the objectives are for the citizens in that area, and there are ways to accomplish the objectives, so we'll continue to work on that. Thank you.
Thank you. That brings us to item 8. It's been moved and properly seconded. Madam Clerk?
Branham,
Yes.
Teratio,
Yes.
Barron,
Yes.
English,
Yes.
Newton.
Yes.
Motion approved.